Let's get something straight right from the start. Life has a funny way of shaking you awake. You can have the titles, the fame, the fortune, and still feel empty. You can travel the world and still not find yourself. Because peace of mind isn't a destination, it's a realization. And for some people, that realization happens in the most sacred of places, Mecca. Now, I don't care who you are or where you come from. When your heart starts asking the big questions, you listen. And if you're lucky, life gives you a chance to rewrite your story, not with power, not with wealth, but with faith. At some point in every person's life, a quiet stirring begins deep within the heart, a pull that no fame, wealth, or comfort can silence, a whisper that says there has to be something greater, something beyond the glitter and noise of this world, something purer, something real. It is not a call you hear with your ears, but a voice that speaks directly to your soul, the kind of voice that interrupts the noise of daily life when you least expect it, the kind that questions everything you thought you knew about happiness, success, and purpose. You can ignore it for a while, drown it out with distractions, surround yourself with people who applaud your achievements, but sooner or later, that call becomes louder, more insistent, demanding to be heard. It does not shout, it doesn't argue, it simply waits quietly, patiently, asking one question that pierces through the illusion of control: who are you when the world isn't watching? That call is the beginning of every spiritual journey. It is not a weakness to feel lost. It is a sign that you are finally ready to be found. When a person starts to feel the emptiness behind the noise, it means the heart is waking up. You begin to realize that all the things you've been chasing, recognition, admiration, comfort, are not enough. They fill your calendar but not your soul. They make your days busy but your nights restless. You smile for the cameras, laugh for the crowds, but inside there's a quiet ache, a longing to connect to something eternal. That ache is not your enemy, it is your guide. It is your soul trying to bring you home. And when you finally decide to listen, when you stop running from that whisper and start walking toward it, your life begins to change in ways you can't explain. You start to see that faith isn't about rituals or appearances, it's about surrender. Not surrender as defeat, but as release, letting go of the walls you've built, the image you've tried to maintain, the need to control every outcome. You realize that surrender is freedom, because in surrendering, you stop pretending to be in charge of the universe and finally trust the one who actually is. The first step of the journey to Mecca begins long before your feet touch the holy ground. It begins when your heart bows quietly, humbly, in the unseen space between you and your Creator. Answering that call takes courage. It's not easy to walk away from everything familiar, to question what you've always believed, to face the silence where truth speaks loudest. The world tells you to keep moving, to stay busy, to keep shining, but faith tells you to pause, to reflect, to listen. And when you do, you begin to see how much noise you've allowed into your life, how much of your identity is built on other people's expectations. The journey begins when you finally say, enough, enough pretending, enough performing, enough trying to fill the soul with temporary things. It begins when you turn inward, when you stop asking, what do I want to be seen as? And start asking, what do I need to become to find peace? That's when the transformation starts, quietly at first, like dawn breaking over a desert horizon. You begin to crave stillness. You begin to feel gratitude for things you once ignored: a simple prayer, a quiet moment, a breath of peace that can't be bought. You begin to recognize that faith isn't found in grand speeches or public gestures, but in private honesty, in those moments when you stand alone and whisper to your Creator with nothing to prove, nothing to hide. The call of the soul leads you to strip away the unnecessary, to return to simplicity, to remember that before you were anything, a name, a title, a role, you were a soul searching for its source. And that call, that whisper, that unshakable yearning to connect with the divine is not something to fear. It is the greatest invitation you will ever receive. When the soul finally answers the call and begins the sacred journey, something profound starts to happen inside. The walls of ego, pride, and illusion slowly begin to crumble. The journey beyond ego is not an easy one because ego has been your armor for so long. It's the mask you wear to feel strong, the story you tell yourself to stay relevant, the shield that keeps you from feeling small. But in the presence of something truly divine, all those layers start to feel heavy, unnecessary, false. You begin to realize that ego was never strength, it was fear disguised as confidence. It was the fear of being ordinary, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being seen without titles, without fame, without the noise that keeps you from meeting your real self. When a person walks toward a place of purity, a place where only faith matters, the ego begins to tremble because it knows it cannot survive there. In that sacred space, status loses its meaning. No one cares who you were outside those gates, how much money you have, what name you carry, or how many people know your face. Everyone stands the same, dressed the same, moving in the same rhythm of devotion. You stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers who are no longer strangers, because in that moment you realize there is no higher and no lower, only souls standing equal before the Creator. The ego that once thrived on separation and superiority starts to weaken because it can't find fuel here. It can't find comparison or competition. It can't whisper its usual lies that you're better, more important, more deserving. All it can do is watch as humility takes its place. And humility, once it enters the heart, begins to heal what pride has destroyed. As the layers of ego fall away, you start to feel lighter. It's as if you've been carrying a weight you didn't know was there, a burden made of other people's opinions, expectations, and judgments. You begin to see how much energy you spent maintaining an image that never brought peace. The moment you let go of that image, something beautiful happens. You start to feel free. You realize that the truest form of dignity is not in being admired, but in being sincere, not in being perfect, but in being real. Every step you take in that sacred place feels like a cleansing, as if each movement washes away years of pride and pretension. You are no longer trying to be someone special, you are simply trying to be someone true. And in that simplicity, you begin to see yourself clearly for the first time. You realize how fragile you are, how small you are in the vastness of creation, yet how deeply loved you are by the one who made it all. That realization doesn't make you feel weak, it makes you feel alive. It reminds you that greatness is not measured by crowns or applause, but by the purity of your heart and the sincerity of your worship. It reminds you that power without humility is hollow, that success without gratitude is empty, that life without faith is directionless. The journey beyond ego teaches you that losing yourself in the service of truth is not a loss, it's liberation. Every moment in that sacred environment strips away another illusion. You begin to understand that the things the world glorifies, control, dominance, prestige, are nothing compared to the peace that comes from submission to the divine. You realize that real strength is not in commanding others, but in commanding yourself, your thoughts, your impulses, your pride. Real victory is not over the world, but over your own arrogance, and as the ego fades, compassion grows. You start to see others differently. You see their struggles, their prayers, their humanity. You stop judging, stop competing, stop pretending. You start feeling connected to everyone and everything because the illusion of separation that ego built has disappeared. By the time you look within and see what remains after ego has been silenced, you find something priceless: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from getting what you want, but the peace that comes from finally letting go of the need to be more than what you are. You stand there, stripped of labels, wealth, pride, and fear, and for the first time you see yourself not as the world sees you, but as you truly are: a soul, humbled, awakened, and free. The world teaches us from the moment we open our eyes that happiness is something to be chased, something to be earned, something to be displayed, and so we run after it in all directions. We chase pleasure thinking it will fill the emptiness. We chase attention thinking it will prove our worth. We chase success thinking it will silence our doubts. but the truth is that none of it heals the heart. The more we chase, the more lost we become, because what we are really searching for is not pleasure but peace, not admiration but acceptance, not noise but meaning. The heart doesn't crave luxury, it craves light. And that light doesn't come from the world, it comes from the Creator. When a person begins to understand that, the healing begins quietly and gently from the inside out. Faith becomes the medicine that the soul has been begging for, and the prayer becomes the breath that keeps it alive. In the world outside, we learn to perform, to prove, to impress, but in faith, all of that becomes irrelevant. You don't pray to be seen, you pray to be understood. You don't bow to be noticed, you bow to be forgiven. And when you finally allow faith to enter your life sincerely, the noise that once ruled your mind begins to fade. The same noise that made you doubt your value, that pushed you to compete, that told you were never enough. Faith doesn't erase the pain, but it gives it purpose. It transforms every wound into wisdom, every setback into surrender, every tear into testimony. That's how faith heals, not by changing what happens around you, but by changing how you see it, how you carry it, how you respond to it. The heart that turns toward God begins to remember what peace feels like. It remembers that peace is not the absence of hardship, but the presence of trust. You start to realize that you don't need to understand everything to feel safe. You just need to trust the one who understands it all. That trust softens your heart, calms your fears, and makes you see the beauty even in difficulty. The same events that once made you angry now make you humble. The same losses that once broke you now bring you closer to the divine. Healing through faith is not about escaping pain, it's about transforming it into strength, about realizing that even the hardest moments were guiding you towards something sacred. When you stand in Mecca, surrounded by millions of souls who have also come searching for forgiveness, your heart finally understands that it was never alone. You see tears, you see prayers, you see people from every language and color and background, all standing equal before the same Creator, all asking for mercy, all longing for peace. And in that moment, your heart feels something it has never felt before: unity. The kind of unity that dissolves pride, fear, and loneliness all at once. You realize that the world has spent so much time dividing people by what they have, how they look, where they are from. But faith unites them in the simplest and most powerful way by reminding everyone that they are human, fragile, and in need of the same mercy. Healing through faith also means learning to forgive not just others but yourself. The past mistakes that haunted you start to feel lighter when you remember that mercy was written for those who seek it sincerely. You stop carrying the guilt that kept you in chains. You start walking with gratitude instead of regret. You learn that God doesn't expect perfection. He expects effort, honesty, humility, and that realization alone can heal the heart more deeply than anything else in this world. As faith deepens, the heart becomes soft again, and from that softness grows strength, the quiet, unshakable kind of strength that comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you are held, guided, and loved by the one who never leaves. The applause of people fades, the illusions of status disappear, and what remains is something pure, a heart that finally feels whole, not because it has everything, but because it finally found its way back to faith. When the heart has been softened by faith and the noise of the world begins to fade, reflection becomes a mirror that shows what was once hidden beneath the layers of pride, fear, and confusion. In the silence that surrounds the soul, truth starts to whisper, not in grand speeches or dramatic moments, but in the stillness between one breath and another. You begin to notice things you used to overlook: the tone in your voice, the weight of your words, the motives behind your actions. Reflection is not about judgment, it is about clarity. It is the courage to face yourself without excuses, to look into your own heart and see not who you pretend to be, but who you truly are. It is the moment you stop running from your flaws and start understanding them. It is the process of peeling back the layers until only sincerity remains. In that sacred quiet, every memory, every decision, every wound comes into focus. You start to see the patterns of your life, the choices that led you astray, the blessings you once ignored, the lessons you refused to learn. Reflection turns pain into perspective. It makes you realize that every loss had a reason, that every delay was protection, that every unanswered prayer was a doorway to something greater. The heart that reflects begins to see meaning in moments that once felt meaningless. It stops asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begins to ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift in thought is the beginning of wisdom. It transforms bitterness into gratitude, confusion into peace, and despair into faith. Reflection also exposes how often we have been at war with ourselves. You see how many times you tried to please everyone while betraying your own soul, how often you sought validation from people who could never understand your heart, how easily you gave away your peace for the sake of being accepted. You start to realize that much of your pain came not from what others did to you, but from how much you expected them to heal what only God could heal. Reflection teaches humility because it shows you how fragile you truly are, how dependent you are on divine guidance, how easily you can lose yourself when you forget your purpose. It brings you face to face with your need for mercy, and that realization alone is powerful enough to purify the heart. As you reflect, gratitude begins to grow in places where resentment once lived. You start to thank the Creator not just for what went right, but for what went wrong, because you can finally see how even the hardest moments were shaping you into something stronger, wiser, and softer. You remember the nights you cried for help, and how, in ways you didn't see then, you were being heard. Reflection turns regret into remembrance, and remembrance into renewal. It makes you gentle, patient, and kind, because you understand that everyone is fighting a battle you cannot see, including yourself. You stop demanding perfection from people because you've learned how imperfect you are. You stop holding grudges because you realize that forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself before anyone else. When a person reaches this level of reflection, their heart starts to speak a different language. The rush for material gain loses its charm. The obsession with appearance and applause fades. You begin to crave peace more than attention, truth more than comfort, sincerity more than success. You look at the world differently, not as a stage to perform on, but as a classroom to learn in. Every interaction becomes a lesson, every challenge a test, every blessing a reminder. Reflection becomes a daily act of renewal, a way of cleansing the heart from arrogance and filling it with awareness. And through it all, you begin to see the greatest truth of all, that everything you were searching for in the world was already within you, waiting for you to pause long enough to notice. The heart that reflects learns that real wealth is not in possessions but in peace, that real beauty is not in appearance but in sincerity, and that real success is not in rising above others but in rising above your own ignorance. Reflection doesn't just change how you see life. It changes how you live it. It teaches you that the answers you seek will never be found in noise or haste, but in silence, patience, and faith, the quiet spaces where your soul finally meets its truth. When a person returns from a journey that touches the soul, something within them is never the same again. The eyes that once saw the world through pride and desire now see it through gratitude and awareness. Every breath feels different, every moment carries weight, every heartbeat whispers a reminder of the sacred. The life that once felt heavy with expectation now feels light with purpose. You walk through the same streets, meet the same people, face the same responsibilities, but your heart beats to a different rhythm. You no longer move to impress, you move to express sincerity. You no longer seek approval from others because you have found peace in being known by the one who created you. This is the quiet transformation that happens after a true spiritual awakening. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. It shows itself in how gently you speak, how calmly you respond, how deeply you care. The person who has walked through the sacred land and bowed their heart in humility returns not with superiority but with softness. The arrogance that once blinded them begins to dissolve. You start to see people as souls, not as roles, and you start to measure worth not by appearance or wealth, but by character and compassion. Your priorities shift without you even trying. The things that once consumed your mind, status, gossip, comparison, start to feel meaningless. You learn to choose silence over argument, patience over pride, forgiveness over resentment. You begin to realize that true strength is not in dominating others, but in mastering yourself. The peace you once searched for in the world you now find within yourself, in prayer, in gratitude, in simplicity. Every act becomes worship when done with sincerity. You see beauty in small things, the smile of a stranger, the sound of the wind, the warmth of the morning light. You become present in ways you never were before because you understand that every moment is borrowed, every blessing temporary, every breath a gift. The heart that has truly tasted faith becomes humble because it knows that everything can be taken, and yet everything can also be renewed. That awareness turns your life into a series of thank yous whispered under your breath. You thank the Creator for guidance, for mercy, for second chances. You thank Him even for the pain that pushed you toward Him. When you carry that light within you, it begins to reflect in everything you do. You treat people differently. You listen more. You judge less. You stop trying to change others and start changing yourself. You become a reminder of peace in a world drowning in noise. You become a vessel of calm in the middle of chaos. The energy of faith radiates from you without words, because true faith doesn't need to be preached. It is seen, felt, and remembered. You become the kind of person whose silence teaches more than others' speeches, whose humility speaks louder than pride ever could. Transformation after such a journey also means learning balance. It means living in the world but not becoming its prisoner. You fulfill your duties, you work, you strive, but you do it all with consciousness, with remembrance. You don't run away from life. You simply walk through it differently, with gratitude instead of greed, with awareness instead of arrogance. The more your faith deepens, the more you realize that every day is a continuation of that journey, that Mecca is not just a place on earth, but a state of the heart, a reminder to return to sincerity again and again. And as time passes, you notice how peace begins to follow you, not the kind of peace that depends on comfort, but the kind that remains even when life gets hard. You face challenges with patience, you face loss with trust, and you face success with humility. Because once your soul has bowed in front of the divine, nothing in this world can make you bow in front of fear again. You begin to live not for applause, but for purpose, not for validation, but for truth. The transformation that started as a moment of awakening becomes a way of living. You realize that the true pilgrimage was never about distance or destination. It was about finding your way back to your heart, and in doing so, finding your way back to God. So here's the verdict: true transformation doesn't happen in palaces or on stages or through power. It happens when the heart bows, when the ego breaks, and when a person realizes that peace doesn't come from the world, it comes from the one who made it. You can call it awakening, enlightenment, or faith. But let's be clear, when a person finds God, they find themselves, and that is a life-changing journey worth taking.